It's my honor to present you our first guest speaker, Judit Babidorics, who serves as the advisor to the CEO of NKM National Utilities Company. But Judit, would you like to tell us who you are and what exactly you represent?
Sure. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Judit Babidorics. I come from MVM Group. My profession is sustainable development and environmental protection. I spent 12 years in consultancy at the Big Four companies. And in the last 10 years, I worked for an energy company as a sustainable development and environmental expert. As I mentioned, I come from MVM Group, which is a nationally owned energy company covering the total domestic energy system. The main responsibilities are energy producer, operating Paks nuclear power plant or Matra coal-fired power plant, for example. MVM is also an electricity trader, transmission and distribution system operator, gas trader, and operating gas storage facilities. And last but not least, electricity and gas service provider for approximately 4 million customers. Thanks.
Wow, thank you. And as a key stakeholder in the energy grid operator, MVM Group, as you said, can you please tell us what is the energy mix and how does the energy landscape of Hungary look like?
Sure. Let's see what is energy mix. What does it mean? I would say that this is a kind of balance between energy supply and energy demand of a country. Each country has different mixes because it's determined by the landscape, the climate, the own energy production capacities, and the cross-border capacities like gas pipeline or electricity pipeline for import. In Hungary, actually 45–47% of energy supply covered by domestic energy production. In domestic energy production, nuclear energy is the most important, which are followed by renewables, mainly biomass, and now solar is growing rapidly. And the next is coal and the natural gas. To cover the rest energy demand of the country, Hungary has to import energy sources. Hungary imports mainly natural gas and oil from Russia. From the demand side perspective, we can say that oil is used mainly by transport and traffic, and natural gas is used by public households for heating and warm water, and the trading sector is also using natural gas. If we analyze a little bit the demand side, in Hungary, the biggest energy consumer is the public sector, the households. The second is traffic and transport, and the third is the industry. 30–40% of the total energy consumption is for household, heating, warm water, and electricity. We can see that these sectors are mainly fossil fuel based. Therefore, the share of greenhouse gas emission of public is really significant. if you are interested and would like to analyze or research these energy data, I would suggest the Central Statistical Office and the Energy and Public Utility Regulatory Authority on national level. On EU level, I think Eurostat database is the best. And then worldwide, the International Energy Agency is a really good source. And let's say some words about the MATRA, which I think in Hungary, from client perspective, is the biggest challenge now. This is a more than 50 years old coal-fired power plant with a high CO2 emission, and 9 years long program started in order to CO2 emission reduction. And this coal-fired power plant will be shut down at the end of 2025. This is a really outdated technology with low efficiency and very high CO2 emission. This reconstruction program has 4 pillars. We have to replace this production capacity, and the plan is to implement a combined cycle gas power plant, a biomass fire block, and the power plant has 2 mines which will be recultivated, and the plan is to implement 2 solar parks on the area of the mines. I think that's all, but I would like to share with this question. I don't know if you have any question. I'm ready to answer it.
Thank you, Judit. I think it's great that you also shared how one can look up and research these kind of data from a national perspective. We aim to have this as part of this educational competence model, as I mentioned before. When it comes to related goals, climate strategies, energy plans in the EU, how can we individuals get informed and participate in achieving them?
Actually, EU has really ambitious targets to reduce these greenhouse gas emission and fighting climate change, and through policies and legislation and determined greenhouse gas emission reduction, energy efficiency and renewable targets are determined for nations. And these goals are coming from the Paris Agreement, where the participating countries agreed to keep the global temperature rising below 1.5 Celsius. We can state that energy demand is growing, and our task is to produce energy from renewables, use it more efficiently, and as a result to reduce the GHG emission. These data and the progress are presented by the statistical offices homepage and the energy authority and the innovation and technology ministry are also publish analysis about the progress. Let's see if we are talking about these EU targets. We can say that we are moving forward to the targets by 2030. The target is to cut emission by at 55%, which is really ambitious. The progress is presented on the ministry's homepage. And also there is an obligation for the member states that to prepare a kind of progress report to the EU, what we achieved. And yes.
All right. Thank you, Judit. And now that we are put into perspective, thanks to you, with national as well as European energy landscape, I can't wait to dive into renewable energy with our second guest speaker. Is anyone else here excited like I am about renewable energy? Renewables are such a hype these days, and I'm curious if our speaker will help us separate this hype from the actual tendency of renewable energy penetrating the energy market or not. And I think yesterday there was a post, and this is also a follow-up of several reports from the past week or so that that sums up why our current climate efforts, why current national climate efforts are not meeting the targets. And this one is from UN Climate Change. Once upon a time, coal brought cheap electricity to entire regions and vital jobs to communities. Those days are gone. In virtually all markets, it is now cheaper to build renewable energy capacity than new coal plants. So I think this is a good transition to Matra, the place of the coal plant that Judit just mentioned. So I'm turning to Ferenc. Can you please introduce yourself and tell a few words about your entity and your past experiences in the renewable energy sector in Hungary?
All right. So my name is Ferenc Kiss, and I'm working for a UK-based engineering and consulting firm called RSK. Actually, RSK is the largest private engineering firm in the UK. We have like 5,000 colleagues, and we have offices in 30 countries, including Hungary. But in Europe, we have offices in Poland, France, Italy, Belgium. And traditionally, our company is an environmental company supporting oil and gas companies. So our major clients are Shell, BP, RWE. And as these companies are turning to renewables, the ones serving them and supporting on permitting, we do the same. So for example, my noise or air emission experts in the past worked on an oil refinery. Today they work on wind turbines, as in your background, Viktor. And actually it's surprising how these colleagues, how these experts, whether it's geoengineering or noise modeling, are so keen to work on renewable energy. and how these skills are transferable. That's just my excitement about this transition. And about myself, yes, in the last 1.5 years, I more involved to this company's work. And before that, I worked as head of the environmental protection for Budapest Airport. And I was also responsible for the energy and carbon management for the airport. We made up to carbon neutral by offsetting. So for 3 years, the airport offset all its emissions. It's about 20,000 tons. And I also worked on the net zero plan. So how to make the whole infrastructure net zero carbon neutral, meaning how to produce heat and electricity on site. That's my background.
Thank you for that intro, and I'm excited that we share. I'm happy that we share this excitement about renewable energy, and I'm sure many others do. Maybe also in this call. So, what role does renewable energy play in Hungary's energy infrastructure, and what is the current capacity compared to what you have experienced in the past?
If we really stick to numbers, and it's very good that Judit mentioned the International Energy Agency or the European Statistic Office. These numbers usually published in the beginning of the year, and actually this is causing almost year by year a big, let's say, a number of comments how poorly actually Hungary is performing. So if you look at the chart, out of the 27 EU countries, Hungary is somewhere in the last 5 or 6 countries when it comes about renewable electricity production. And in percentage is about 13%. So basically we are ahead of Poland, but Czech Republic, Slovakia, Germany, Italy, Spain, they are all ahead of us, not talking about Denmark or Finland. So the short answer is where we are now is about 10 to 13% renewables. But there is another interesting number I recommend everybody to visit, is the CO2 emission of Hungary. And actually, over the past years, it was growing. So that's another data. Again, I recommend to visit for everybody, that in one hand, the renewable share is increasing slightly, but the CO2 emission as a country is actually increasing, which is not what decarbonization is about.
Yes, and here on your last point, I would really like to navigate people and participants to this very fresh report from the IEA, as also mentioned by Judit, the International Energy Agency, which just published a report on the global emissions in 2020, which is exciting and interesting because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and to compare it to other years, and to look ahead. All right, okay, and when it comes to getting people on board and informing them about these trends, from the demand side, how is the perception of individuals and institutions of renewable energy in Hungary compared to the rest of the region?
Well, I think there are two trends we can observe for sure. One is how multinational companies are engaged for decarbonization. And actually, there is an initiative called RE100. And actually, not only 100 companies joined, but they exceeded 1,000, if I'm correct, sometime last year. And actually, these companies and name any sport brands like Nike, Adidas, but also car manufacturers, IT companies, and all sorts of FMCG companies. They pledged until 2025, 2030 that their operation will be supplied by renewable energy. And I think this is a very important step, because irrespective which country they operate, I can give you example of which one might relevant. Okay, let's say Lego, for example, the Danish manufacturer. When Lego decided that they will go for net zero production, they had to look at solutions irrespective what is the Hungarian CO2 emission of the grid. So Lego in Nyíregyháza is working on a solar power plant for its own production. And I think this is something great, that companies are not pointing anymore to governments that we would be happy to pay for green electricity, but nobody builds those wind power plants or solar power plants. But now there are possibilities to do it for themselves. So if you buy those products, you vote for the production, how it was produced. Something similar like if you buy an organic food, for example. So this is for the companies. And as individuals, yes, you as an individual can have decisions like solar panels on your roof or heat pumps. So these are all possibilities for yeah, exactly. That's actually an initiative by WWF as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you pointed to the RE100 group, which does underline that companies around the world are taking action, and we're talking about, as you mentioned a few, Ferenc, of Fortune 100 companies who have set one or more clean energy targets, which are significant numbers, and if you look at the re100.org, you can see that over 280 top companies have made such commitments. And at the end of the day, as you also pointed out, at the end of the day, it's us, the users and the consumers, sometimes to drive this demand. But I think this is an interesting topic to further go into, where this commitment comes from. Does it come from us, the consumers, or does it come just from investor interests and market dynamics? Okay, I think we heard a couple of outstanding insights from the general energy and the renewable energy field to arrive to our crossfire discussion. I'm sure I don't need to remind you that our game mode is set on friendly fire, so do not do any roasting in this crossfire discussion. Okay, here we go. At a crossfire discussion, any speaker can have an input at any point. There's no order. here we go. So in the climate action and energy context, what do you think will trigger large-scale behavior change in our societies?
Let me start.
Sure.
You know, I believe in step-by-step approach. And I think education and knowledge sharing are really crucial in this story. But the role of the regulator, I think, is more important. And the energy and climate legislation rules should be stricter. We have to improve the regulatory system, which prefers the so-called good behavior and punish the bad from climate perspective, of course. For example, donate the low carbon technologies and non-polluting consumers, and charge the environmental, climate, and health related cost for the polluting technologies and its consumers. So this is what I mean about the regulatory system. Thanks.
All right.
I absolutely agree that the regulators have a huge role. What I would like to add is the financing institutions. So as soon as the European Investment Bank, for example, made the announcement that they will not invest into fossil technologies after 2022, if I'm correct, then it is even more strong than a single country as a regulator, because no matter what is the regulation in a given country, if there will be no financing for new fossil projects, for example. And I'm not just talking about the European Investment Bank, but other institutional investors are either avoiding fossil technologies or incentivizing renewables. And just let me give an interesting detail from the UK. What was the impact of COVID last April, May in the UK was that the demand of electricity was reduced because plants and factories were shut down and shopping malls were shut down. So the electricity consumption was reduced, and there were very windy days and very sunny April days, which actually either cleaner sky, but I don't really believe that was the reason. It was just a meteorological reason. And for many days, and actually more than a month, all coal power plants were shut down in the UK because the lower electricity demand and the higher renewables were actually enough to produce completely renewables, and the nuclear hasn't changed. So I think it is something great to show that actually renewables are cheaper, and it was possible to maintain the grid and manage the system, which even the UK system operator was expecting that high share of renewables and low or zero coal in 5-10 years time. So it was a kind of travel in time to the future, which was an interesting experiment for them. The same hasn't happened in Hungary, but the UK and some other countries have that experience.
Thanks to both of you. If I may sum up, so there was a suggestion from a regulatory perspective. Basically, the polluter pays principle. Those who pollute more have to bear the costs, which is a very popular principle among environmentalists, climate activists, and I see some agreement or some alignment between your perspectives, saying that you need to regulate it from a financial perspective. You need to regulate it from a market perspective, and provide some type of federal action. When you pointed to the European Investment Bank, a federal action from the financing side, and okay. Moving on to the next crossfire question. Okay, here we go. Do you expect a visible change of the energy infrastructure in the coming decade?
Well, let me start again. Yes, my answer is yes, absolutely. I think e-mobility, e-charging are significantly growing, and they have to have a direct connection to the national transmission system. I assume that the energy storage will improve rapidly from in industrial and household scales also. These technologies are we can say they are ready, and we have to solve the integration into the energy system. For example, in Germany, every second household implement storage facility with solar on roof system. In Hungary, this is not a requirement, and this is not let's say popular now. Or yet, sorry.
Okay.
And maybe just one more thing, that we have in Hungary now big centralized power plant units, and the European Union is really pushing the decentralized system. And I think I don't know the time scale, but there will be more and more local, smaller power plants providing energy for local communities, for example, for local government.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that on domestic level, like household level, there will be big changes. And I think it's very important to see that the energy autonomy, or let's say mobility autonomy, which was lacking for, I don't know, 50 or 100 years. So when you had a horse and you had some grassland, then you had a mobility, right? And you could horse ride to the next town where you had a how that called, like the hotel with the horse stables, and then you could travel up to Germany, right? So you had the mobility autonomy, and you haven't need anything else. And when we left horses, we have now cars. And when there is a tax increase on fuel, and all the taxi drivers on the streets, or people marching in France because of diesel extra charges on the gasoline, it means people's autonomy was lost because they are stick to the gas stations. And imagine if you have taxi drivers with solar rooftop at their homes and they have electric vehicles, basically they get back to the same autonomy and they don't care what tax is on fuel because they can produce their own fuel for their vehicles. Or I step one back for your home heating. So I think these kind of autonomy, and actually Australia is the country with the highest per capita solar PV, and majority of the people getting solar PV is this autonomy. So they don't ask for how many years is my return on investment, but what is the size of the system that I can be autonomous and independent of the grid, which is a very different driver. I don't want to earn or save costs, but I want to be autonomous to, of course, to a certain extent. And there are times of the year where you cannot, or you need huge batteries. In Hungary, maybe in Australia, it's not that big deal. But it's I think a very strong argument, and we will see it in the infrastructure.
I sense that, yes.
Just I just wonder one more interesting stuff, and it is just again a perspective when we talk about infrastructure. For example, the power network in Hungary or anywhere in Europe is designed for the conditions that, let's say, in the hottest summer day, these high voltage cables are able to transit as much power as their nominal power, for example. And in Germany, often when the wind blows and the temperature is not that high, the cable itself could transport more power, but because of this, let's say, heritage of the standards, it is not happening. So often, even the transmission network has to, let's say, upgrade it, that in some days of the year or under certain meteorological conditions, the power network will be able to transport more electricity. And to make measurements for that and to make the whole system still highly reliable, these are all challenges what us as customers don't see, but a huge, let's say, technological changes are happening also, for example, regarding existing power lines.
I sense there is a correlation. There is a correlation between your visions about the change when it comes to e-mobility and these more autonomous or community energy initiatives. And so if I want to be pragmatic and if I want to imagine your future or the 10 years of future that you see, do you see us generating energy, let's say through solar on our roofs, which can maybe be stored and fuel to our horses and cars? Do you see maybe an opportunity that we can sell this energy or a surplus energy to the grid operator? Is this the future that we see ahead?
It is the present. In the UK, Tesla is not commonly known, but Tesla has the same electricity network operator rights as the other network operators. So Tesla can sell and buy electricity in the UK, and they made an agreement with a smaller operator, and they have a tariff for Tesla. If you have a power wall and you have a vehicle, and you can buy and sell electricity to and from the grid through, let's say, through a smart meter. So when there is a surplus in the network, you can charge your power wall, you can charge your car, but on the other way, the network can take power from your power wall, and this one is as a consumer product. The company called Octopus Energy, and if you go their website, it's a product like if you go for a mobile subscription, and it would be a specific for iPhone. It's something similar, and at the end of the month, the Tesla owner might get payment for his or her bill if he was, using the vehicle in the so not in the peak times.
Okay. From the NKM side, do you see a visible change coming when it comes to smart grids or smart meters?
Yes, if I remember well, actually there are around 20,000 households in Hungary where the public is using smart meter equipment. I think it's a really nice equipment to make people understand their consuming, let's say, consuming their consumption, how much energy they use for heating, for lighting, for the I don't know, the fridge and the washing machine, so they can check, for example, the efficiency level of these household things. And I think there will be a good chance to we were talking about these local communities as energy producer entities. I think in these local communities, the smart metering will be a very important part of this system. Yes, that's all.
All right, thank you. We had a lot of content in under this question. Okay, the last question of the Crossfire discussion. If you could highlighting one thing that the world, governments, people need to do to accelerate climate action, what would that be?
For me, it's a little bit hard to pick one thing. For governments, I would select the energy regulatory system and policy, what I mentioned before, to make it more stricter from climate perspective. And the governments should motivate and force people and the industry to move forward to the non-polluting technologies. of course, Ferenc has right that we have to put the budget and the for these for these works. And I think regarding people, I think we should make people to understand the consequences of climate change and the importance of energy and climate conscious lifestyle. Let's say. Sorry, it was not one thing, but
it's okay. Thank you.
I think the incentives are very good drivers. So the right incentives, and if I have to pick a positive incentive in Hungary, there is for 4 or 5 years a positive discrimination of electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles. They receive a tax incentive, also a one-off subsidy to buy. There was an incentive for free charging for many years. And through these incentives, in the Visegrad countries, Hungary has proportionally 3 times more electric vehicle as the other 4 countries. So if the government wants to push a certain change in the beginning with free parking and all the incentives for green license plate, that can work. And I think you can also take the refurbishment incentive just these weeks kicks in. Many more solar panels we will see, for example, in Hungary. So I think these are positive examples.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So if I may sum up, probably the most important highlight from Judit is government regulations to make energy regulations stricter. And interestingly, at this point, I'd like to add that this project is by the Hungarian Ministry of Innovation and Technology, or called ITM. Which are those bodies? Which are, do you think, those national bodies who can push this and accelerate this this trend when it comes to energy regulation?
I think for renewables, it's very clear the Hungarian Energy Authority creates the regulations. And just very recent example, last week, 2 weeks ago, was announced the Hungarian renewable energy auction results. And over 300 gigawatt hour of renewable power was on tender. And more than 200 solar PV producers were tendering, and 5 times oversubscribed the available capacity. But actually the budget, let's say for the large project category, the required subsidy budget was 0. Meaning to say that 6 projects with 180 megawatt of solar capacity were bidding for a lower price than the reference price was. So they willing to sell their power on market price. They don't want subsidy. This is for renewables. And the mentioned Matra power plant will emit about 2 million tons of CO2, and somebody will pay 40 euros per tons for the emission quota. That's the budget for Matra power plant, and somebody will pay for that. So I'm just showing what is the price for a coal power plant and what is the price for the renewables.
Thanks for bringing this in. And it was also mentioned. It was also mentioned educating people, which is exactly in line with our project here, the Sustainaware project. As we're trying to get this word out there to people, to young people, to schools, and build this climate consciousness, energy awareness that we're talking about. And oh yeah, you brought up the right incentives about the support and subsidy of electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. That there's a subsidy with parking, there's a subsidy with registrations, and I think there's also a funny or interesting trend that all these luxury car brands are coming out with an electric model or with a plug-in hybrid model, and you just see many people using this subsidy and using this tax advantage to save on very expensive cars. Any last thoughts to what was discussed here? All right then. Okay, so thank you. We are arriving to the Q&A part, and here I'm asking the participants to raise a hand. You can turn on your camera, you can turn on your microphone, and this is the time to add, ask, comment, in case you have such. Let me see the chat. You can also write it in the chat if you like. Okay, as long as people are getting inspired to ask questions. How about touching upon the tendency? So in 2020, we've seen a trend that the global oil market went through. I don't know if this can be linked to the pandemic and the prices or something else, but I think that the climate world or the energy world has seen a sudden change when it comes to the price of oil, and this change was different than the projected changes by the IEA, for example. And in the meantime, renewables, as also many times said by you, Ferenc, renewables are getting cheaper and cheaper, and perhaps they are getting cheaper faster than expected. Do you have any thoughts on what are really the drivers behind these trends? Is it consumers? Is it just investors and the market? Is it climate commitment?
I think what we should not forget that Right, renewables are cheaper, but you compare to investments which are already there. So let's say if you have an existing coal power plant or nuclear, it has been already invested. While if you are going for a solar or wind farm, you have to build it first. So it's to me similar like if you are a tenant and let's say you go for a university and you want to have an apartment for 3 years, 5 years, 6 years maybe, and you don't have more commitment, it's likely that you will do some kind of refurbishment, but you don't want to own this apartment for 10 more years. So it's similar if there is a company committed to operate and has a heavy infrastructure and willing to have cheap electricity from the beginning, then for 15 years it pays back to invest into a solar farm. But if it is let's say a pop-up company ready to operate for 1 year, 2 year, if there is let's say a boom of certain services and then it plans to leave, I don't think they will invest for renewables and they will use electricity from the grid or they will have other preferences. So I think these two will also come with a kind of timeline, and it's not something that from day one everybody will use renewables. If they plan for a long time, it makes also an economical sense. But if not, then I think it will remain with the traditional forms.
Let me add one thought to the solar panels. I agree that it's cheaper and cheaper, that technology. But I'm not sure that we really fully aware of the total cost of these kind of installations. I mean that these panels, solar panels, have a kind of life. Maybe I'm not sure in the correct word. So the life duration of the usage, let's say, which is approximately, I think, 10 years. And actually, after this time, what we will do with these panels? As I know, there is not, we don't have a kind of utilization or reuse or technology for the panels, not used panels recycling. So there, I think there will be a huge cost, which is not taking account now. Do you mean? Well, but I would like to say that. For me, the life cycle approach is a little bit missing from this solar park installations. But I don't know, Ferenc, if you do not agree.
Well, that's something. Actually, solar manufacturers are working on that, and what we know for sure that for nuclear waste there will be for 100,000 years. So if we compare the two technologies, I think we will have to pay about 99,000 more years for the nuclear waste than the solar, but that's just a different technology. what is interesting, we have a project in South Africa, a large solar project, and the regulation there is installing a solar farm from a regulatory point of view is like installing a new mine. And if you open a mine, you have to have a closure plan, meaning to say that you have to set aside budget and you have to have a certain plan what happens after the lifetime exceeded, which is to some extent a very smart way of thinking of solar farms, because to some extent it's like a mine, not because you excavate something, but for a certain piece of land you set aside for 20 years, but you have to have an answer today what you're gonna do with that. So again, in Hungary or in Europe, it's not the case, but it is also a regulatory issue that the regulator might look around if there are good practices. And actually, if this is the question, it can be asked from the investor, as it happens in Southern Africa. So I think this is also can be found an answer to that.
I think this is a valid question, and it does come up very often from people when it comes to the waste resulting from different energy sources and infrastructure. And in the meanwhile, received a question from Spera on the chat. So says, I read recently that for the stability of the electricity system, big generators are necessary. Is there a technical solution for this problem available in the field of renewables? Open for anyone to answer or elaborate.
I think Spela is thinking about kind of storage facilities in the system. You know, the electricity system and the national grid is always working on the balance, that the supply and the demand side should be equal. And we can hear many times that the renewables can make problem because because their production is not cannot be planned, and they can make problems with in the electricity system, and it can be solved with with kind of energy storage facilities. I think Spela is thinking about when she's talking about generators. So it's a kind of storage facility in industrial scale. Am I right?
Yes, I think so. It is, and it is called the intermittency of renewables. So you cannot predict, but actually, some countries have these generators called hydropower plants. So grid stability can be provided by hydropower plants, for example. But as I mentioned, Australia, they have one of the biggest utility scale batteries. So that's also something can solve the issues. And actually, yes, the grid stability has many different aspects, whether you talk about the next 15 seconds or 30 seconds or 15 minutes. And there are different solutions for all these, but there are technologies. In the UK, there is one company using old mining shafts with stone. Basically, it is like an elevator. And in the mining shaft, when the electricity is cheap, they pull up the heavy stones. And when they need to generate electricity, they just let sink down and generate power this way. So it is also a kind of generator. And in certain locations, this is also, let's say, an energy storage.
Yes, absolutely agree. And if we see, for example, Austria, they have Alps, really high mountains, and they are full of, let's say, higher powers. And they are also using that kind of method that with renewables, they pump up the water to the top of the hill. And when they need energy, they use the pumped water energy. I mean, they let the water out and they generate electricity with that method. And I think we went back to the energy mix and how the landscape determine the energy mix of the company. For example, Austria, they don't need nuclear plant because they can use the potential of their high mountains and the hydropower.
Thank you for giving an answer to this and also bringing in other interesting insights like this. There's another question here from the participants, from Paula, saying affordability for sure is a key issue. What about true pricing? Also, how are trade agreements affecting energy sources and prices, if so? Need to really think about sustainable energy transition. What drivers and stakeholders do you think will be key to drive this transition?
Can you repeat this question? I'm not sure that I'm really understand.
I think that was there are several thoughts in this. Affordability, what about true pricing? There was a mention on trade agreements. How are trade agreements affecting energy sources and prices? When it comes to the sustainable energy transition, who are the drivers, or what are the drivers? Who are the stakeholders who really need to be activated?
But these financial topics is not.
Yes, and I would call it like it's kind of energy politics or geopolitics, like these trade agreements, of course, whether it's the solar panel made in China, the wind turbine and wind blades made in Poland and Denmark, or oil and gas in the Middle East, or nuclear from Russia. These are all trade agreements. But I'm not sure what was the question about this. We can just state that yes, there are trade agreements. And just to add, when we talk about electricity in Hungary, 25% is import. So we do have trade agreements even on the end product, like on electricity, because we do import from neighboring countries more than we export.
All right. I think there's a lot of food for thought, which can also be seen by the questions here coming up, resulting from our discussion. We are hitting soon the top of the hour, and I think a lot has been said already. So I'd like to thank you, for both of you, both the speakers, for your for accepting the invitation and your active engagement in this discussion. Thank you very much for being here with us. And thank you also to all the participants for coming and for posting some of your questions. We'd be keen to hear how you found this webinar, and we've set up a survey. You can click on the survey, which you see in the bit.ly link on the screen, and give us a feedback how you found it. And as said, this is a webinar series that takes place every 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, during the same time, there will be the next webinar, which is the last one. And you find all the information on this on the Sustainaware Facebook page. Thank you again to all of you, and I'm wishing you a nice evening, afternoon. Bye.